Alright, welcome back to Foundations of Direct Assessment of Academic Behavior. This is our final video part 11. And this is an introduction to high ASR approach to assessment and instruction. So ineffective teachers don't distinguish between engaged time and academic learning time, therefore place too much emphasis on the effects of instructional time on achievement, and provide students with too much wasted time. So this is especially the case when students engage in challenging behavior. And all teachers should self-assess how they structure class time, strive to maximize academic learning time balanced with time for socialization and leisure as appropriate for a given student. One way to increase academic learning time and decrease wasted time is to use function-based treatments to reduce and replace challenging topographies of behavior, socially acceptable topographies of behavior, in the context of class-wide and school-wide behavior supports. Now, another way is to use high ASR strategies. In other words, you would combine the two, function-based interventions for challenging behavior and high ASR strategies, or a high ASR approach to academic assessment, which means creating many opportunities for students to make observable and measurable responses to relevant academic tasks. So, active student responding. One must learn by doing the thing. For though you think you know it, you have no certainty until you try. This quote from the ancient Greek playwright Sophocles makes the point that students must be actively engaged in activities to learn well, and for teachers or instructors to assess whether and what students are learning. Now, students don't actively engage in academic tasks in class because they want to learn. That's circular reasoning. Right? Wanting is not observable or measurable. It's not behavior. It's not environment. It's a hypothetical construct. Students don't, quote, want to learn. They don't want anything. That's not an alterable variable that a teacher or a practitioner can address. It's circular reasoning used by non-behavioral approaches and avoided by direct behavioral assessment of student learning. So students actively engage in academic tasks in class where teachers effectively arrange the environment and task stimuli, such as SDs, conditioned establishing operations that evoke observable, measurable responses, because high-quality reinforcement and other important variables, such as a moderate effort requirement on the part of the student, are available, alterable, and correlated with such environmental variables. Now, Bill Heward in 1994 defined ASR as when a student emits a detectable response to ongoing instruction. So it's instruction that's happening in the here or now, and the student emits a detectable response, meaning observable and measurable. That is, ASR consists of students making observable, measurable responses, such as raising their hand, saying an answer out loud, pressing a key, writing an answer, either spontaneously or in response to teacher instruction, questions, statements, or prompts. ASR technology is mostly useful for academic assessment at the group level. As opposed to the individual level, we have talked mostly about. Although you can use ASR technology at the individual level, of course. Now, a high ASR approach to academic assessment and instruction increases student engagement and provides the instructor with frequent immediate feedback about what is being taught and what students are learning, and frequent, immediate, positive feedback to students for their responses to instruction. So a high ASR approach to academic assessment and instruction turns engaged time into academic learning time. It ensures that time spent engaged or on task is time spent responding to successfully to relevant academic stimuli. Using frequent high ASR in your classroom is also considered a classroom management strategy. And ASR can be used to assess and teach any subject. essentially you modify you select the type of ASR technology based on the types of responses you want to evoke from your students, as well as other considerations. So student engagement refers to students in this context here when we're talking engagement. Engagement refers to students' motivation and opportunity to practice. So it's not just time on task as we're conceptualizing it now. Tin Canyon Twyman in 2016 defined it this way in the context of thinking about ASR. Students' motivation and opportunity to practice and thus learn and master a particular skill. Now, variables that influence student engagement include socioeconomic status, early learning experiences, so instruction that they've received in the past, the school environment, current contingencies for behavior, peers, the quality of the curriculum and instruction, in-teacher interaction, or the student's relationship with the teacher. Now, some of these variables are under a teacher's control. So the teacher's interaction, quality of curriculum and instruction, those are examples, and they exist at the level of behavior-environment interactions. These are also called alterable variables, variables the teacher can directly manipulate to influence student learning. Other variables are not under a teacher's control, such as the student's socioeconomic status. Alterable variables were defined in this way by Tin Canyon and Twyman in 2016. It's instructional, curricular, or behavioral strategies within educators' control that, when changed, lead to measurable improvements in student engagement and performance. Alterable variables include but are not limited to, in other words, there are others. Fidelity of implementation, so whether an intervention is implemented as planned. Inter-observer agreement, that's dependent variable integrity, to the extent to which you can believe the data. And the use of ASR. Those are all things under the teacher or the practitioner or the clinician's control. Those are things that they can alter. Now, each opportunity to respond by a student is a discrete trial. Okay. So remember I told you that discrete trial and incidental teaching or net teaching is just a continuum of high to low structure. Right. So what I mean here, that each opportunity to respond by each opportunity for a student to respond is a discrete trial, what I mean is that they all have that four-term contingency. I'm not suggesting that they're all highly structured. Of course they're not. There's a continuum. But what I am saying here is that they can all student responses can be described, all academic responses, non-academic responses can be described with a four-term contingency. MOSRS. And when data are collected, ASR enables both summative evaluation. So Tin Canyon and Twyman define that as assessing outcomes of an instructional program to determine its effectiveness. Okay, so it's the outcome of the program. And then formative evaluation, which is ongoing assessment of student progress. It's not the outcome. It's not a focus on outcome, but progress. Right? So summative evaluation focuses on outcome of a program. Formative evaluation focuses on the student's progress as it is ongoing for the purpose of frequent instructional decision making. Okay? So summative evaluation has much less of an influence on instructional decision making than formative evaluation. You can use ASR data for both purposes. Alright, ASR 42. Access to one-on-one or group-based instruction. Is this an alterable variable for teachers? A, yes. B, no. A couple more seconds. Alright, I'll close the poll. The answer here is A. Yes, teachers can alter that as a variable. They can choose to provide instruction one-on-one or in a small group format. ASR 43. The student's working memory. Is this an alterable variable for teachers? A, yes. B, no. Couple more seconds. Alright, I'll close the poll. The answer here is no. No, working memory is neither behavior nor environment. It's a hypothetical construct. Some variable is supposedly in a learner's head that influences their behavior, their learning. Nope, totally inaccessible, cannot be altered by a teacher. The teacher can just alter the environment. Now, ASR 44, the student's attention span. Is this an alterable variable for teachers? A, yes, B, no. Couple more seconds. Alright, I'll close the poll, and the answer here is B, no. No, attention span is a hypothetical construct, mentalistic explanation of student behavior. It's a variable. It isn't observable or measurable. It's not behavior. It's not environment. Attention span is something you can totally forget about. It has no impact. It has no relation to student learning or behavior, and you can't change it, therefore, right? It's not alterable by a teacher. Let that idea go. ASR 45. When parents create a quiet space, I should say quiet, so when parents create a quiet space at home for homework, is this an alterable variable for teachers? A, yes, B, no. A couple more seconds. Alright, I'll close the poll. The answer here is B, no. Now, you might be able to make an argument that there is some situation where a teacher can have influence over this. But largely, for the most part, this is not something a teacher can alter. The teacher doesn't have control over this, right? So there are other variables that determine whether parents are going to create a quiet space at home for students to complete their homework. ASR 46, academic learning time. Is this an alterable variable for teachers? A, yes, B, no. A couple more seconds. Alright, I'll go ahead and close the poll. The answer is A, yes, yes. Teachers can increase or use a high ASR approach to increase academic learning time. That's one way they can alter academic learning time. ASR 47. Students' motivation to work hard in class. Is this an alterable variable for teachers? A, yes, B, no. A couple more seconds. Alright, go ahead and close the poll. The answer is A, yes. Remember, now student behavior is operant behavior, so it's described by a four-term contingency. And the first term in the four-term contingency is the MO. That's motivating operation. So that's an antecedent stimulus, condition, or operation in the environment that momentarily alters the current value or effectiveness of consequences for a given behavior and momentarily alters the current probability the behavior will occur. That's just another way of saying altering the student's motivation. Right, motivation's in the environment, and so that means it's alterable variable for teachers. ASR 48. The student's frequency of attendance. Is this an alterable variable for teachers? A, yes, B, no. A couple more seconds. Alright, I'll close the poll, and the answer here is B, no. The teacher cannot, the frequency of attendance is not a variable that a teacher can manipulate or alter. ASR 49. The consequences for the students. Here's the consequences for the student's frequency of attendance. Is this an alterable variable for teachers? A, yes, B, no. A couple more seconds. I'll go ahead and close the poll, and the answer is A, yes. So a teacher cannot directly alter the student's frequency of attendance, but they can alter the consequences. And through altering the consequences for a student's frequency of attendance, they can influence the frequency of attendance. Okay, but the frequency of attendance is not a variable that's altered, it's a variable that's measured. It's the consequences for attendance that a teacher can alter or manipulate. Now, repeatedly evoking observable, measurable responses from all students has many advantages, including the following. You can quickly detect and correct student errors before the test. Right? You don't need to wonder or assume what they're thinking during instruction. You can observe it and measure it. Assessment is continuous, and graph data can be generated, often for database decision-making. Okay, using high ASR to repeatedly evoke observable, measurable responses from all students abates disruptive behavior. That means momentarily decreases its current probability. It evokes relevant academic responses. It works well with small or large group formats with diverse learners, thereby increasing academic equity. Small and large group instruction actually pave the way to inclusion in general education for students with developmental disorders, with autism, with intellectual disability, and high ASR during group instruction helps too, right? So the way to think about this is that you may have students that require intensive one-on-one instruction initially, but then you gradually phase them into small group instruction settings where you can use a high ASR approach at the group level, and that more closely approximates what the student is going to encounter in a general education classroom, so in a full inclusion. And yeah, so you can think of the transition from one-on-one instruction to group-based high ASR as helping the student learn in group settings with less one-on-one instruction. Now, there are 4 low-tech strategies that don't require expensive equipment or technology that if you were teaching, you could use in any classroom now. Response cards, corresponding guided notes, and peer tutoring. Response cards first. A response card is a card that students may use to simultaneously answer teacher-posed questions by writing their answers with dry erase markers or by selecting the appropriate response from an array of choices. They should be used with a brisk instructional pace of instruction, which means that the teacher moves through question-response feedback sequences, that means runs of discrete trials, as quickly as possible, but without hurrying the students. By doing so at a brisk instructional pace, the teacher is reducing inappropriate behavior or behavior incompatible with learning, and they're maximizing academic learning time by keeping students engaged and actively, successfully responding to information from the teacher. Answers to questions should be brief, so like 1 or 2 word answers, 3 word answers. And the types of response cards are write-on and pre-printed. Okay, so these are 2 general types of response cards. For the write-on, you give students like a dry erase board and a dry erase marker. Now the duration of responding is longer because they need time to write. It evokes hear or see write responses. So this is topography-based responding. In other words, they hear you say something and then they write an answer down. Or they see you do or say something and then they write a response down, right? So that evokes hear write or see write responses. Pre-printed response cards. Laminated sheets of paper with response choices that can be selected with a clothespin or other easy-to-see clip. Response choices can be numbers, symbols, words, colors, letters, pictures, or others. Those are variable features of pre-printed response cards. And it evokes hear or see choose responses. So this is selection-based responding. 2 different types of student responses, topography-based or selection-based. Topography-based, they vary the form of their response. In other words, they write different words in order to respond to a teacher's statement, question, or instruction. And with response cards, it's selection-based responding, which means there are already stimuli on the card and they're selecting those stimuli in response to student question, statement, or instruction. And so what they do is they hear you say something and then they select a stimulus on their response card, or they see you do or say something and then they select a stimulus on their response card. Okay. Advantages of response cards: everyone has a chance to respond. No one's sitting there not engaged. Everyone has a chance to respond and receive feedback and reinforcement. So you can give whole group feedback, or individually you can give students feedback as needed. If there are some students who are struggling or falling behind, it provides the instructor feedback needed to revise instruction and provide new examples and non-examples. You can increase the rate of responding and therefore increase the rate of reinforcement. Students can't give the answer away. So in other words, by a student shouting out or telling others what the answer is, because everyone is selecting their response simultaneously without showing their response yet. So you can assess whether students learned from what you as the teacher or therapist did, or what they learned from the curriculum materials, rather than basically imitating others when they respond to the statement, question, or instruction. Now, how do you use response cards? Well, for all types of response cards, you use behavioral skills training initially to teach students to use the response cards before incorporating the response cards into instruction. You have to teach them that skill first. And while you're using response cards, you clearly signal to students when it's time to show their cards or put them down. You use a brief inner trial interval and maintain an energetic pace, and you let students see others' responses after you have signaled for everyone to show their response. For pre-printed response cards, make cards easy to see, make cards easy to use and display. Begin with easy trials and include harder trials, and students demonstrate learning as students demonstrate learning. Okay, so you're interspersing easy or maintenance or mastered trials with acquisition trials, harder trials. And that's an abolishing operation for escape or avoidance, and it increases student responsiveness. For write-on response cards, that was pre-printed before. Now, write-on response cards, you limit verbal responses to 1 or 3 word responses, or 1 or a few numbers. Okay, so have extra materials. Ensure students' response times are not influenced by spelling. By telling them that spelling errors are not going to be penalized, and what they write, not how they write, is what matters. Okay, and then let kids draw on their response cards during free time. Okay, so what I would like you to do is go ahead and pause this video and type these addresses into your web browser and view a couple of sample videos of response cards. In these videos, you're seeing response cards incorporated into choral responding, which we'll discuss next. Okay, I'll assume you watched the videos and you're back. So let's cover choral responding. It should be used with a brisk instructional pace of instruction. It has that in common with response cards. And students orally respond in unison to teacher-posed questions. So the teacher poses the questions and everyone in the class says the answer at the same time. It's used during small and whole group instruction. It's best used when answers are brief, just like response cards. Now what happens is the teacher gives a signal when it's time for students to respond. So the teacher will say, "Tell me," or "and respond," or "answer," or they'll use a clicker or something else. I'll give you some more examples in a little bit. So how do you use choral responding? Well, what you do is you give clear directions and model the activity. So just like response cards, you have to teach them how and when to respond to the SD. That is the signal that the teacher is going to give. Then when you're using choral responding, you give an answer, you give a question, make a statement, or give an instruction, and then you provide students with a brief pause so they can think. And then you signal students a response. So that means present the SD. So you may tap on a surface, you may have your hands up while students are thinking, and then you lower them like this to signal it's time for them to respond. Or you may just say respond or answer, or you may use an auditory clicker. And then once students respond, you provide feedback, either feedback that's meant to reinforce or to punish incorrect responses, or to use error correction. And then you can intersperse individual turns, which means you can intersperse interactions with individual students in the group to individualize feedback and practice, and maintain a lively pace. Alright, so I suggest now you pause the video and go ahead and type those addresses into your web browser and view those sample videos of choral responding. And then come on back. Okay, I'll assume you've watched those videos and you're back. So here are some examples from one of your assigned readings. These are sample teacher questions, student responses, teacher feedback, and statements. These are for response cards here. So I'm giving you this a little late, I suppose. But that's okay. No, we're going to skip it. We're going to skip it. But I'll tell you what will be good for me to note here is to continuously remind you that the trials that consist of response card or choral responding are always described by the four-term contingency. There's an establishing operation, then an SD, there's a latency, and then the students respond, and there's a consequence you deliver. So just a reminder that this is operant behavior you're evoking. Now, advantages of choral responding is that everyone has a chance to respond, just like response cards. You can give whole group feedback or individually as needed. It provides the instructor feedback needed to revise or provide new examples and non-examples. Increases the rate of responding, therefore increases the rate of reinforcement. Students can't give the answer away, so you can assess what students learned from what you said or did or the curriculum material, similar to response cards. ASR. Next ASR is write-on and pre-printed are types of A, response cards, or B, choral responding. Couple more seconds. Alright, I'll go ahead and close the poll. The answer is A, response cards. Students say the answer out loud together. A, response cards, or B, choral responding. Couple more seconds. Alright, I'll close the poll. The answer is B, choral responding. Increases the rate of reinforcement for all students. A, response cards, B, choral responding, C, both, or D, neither. Couple more seconds. Alright, I'll close the poll and the answer is C, both. Alright, next is guided notes. Taking lecture notes does not simply mean writing down what the teacher or instructor says. Now, note-taking is part of learning and should include making sense of what the teacher or instructor says. So, unfortunately, many students lack adequate note-taking skills. That is, they lack the skills of discriminating between relevant and irrelevant information, organizing information, an accurate and fluent recording of information, and students unfortunately may write information down inaccurately. While guided notes help students write down or type appropriate, accurate notes on what the teacher or instructor says, what the information means, and how concepts are related. Guided notes were defined by Bill Heward in '94 as teacher-prepared handouts that guide a student through a lecture with standard cues and prepared space in which to write the key facts, concepts, and/or relationships. Now you've had exposure to a lot of guided notes in this course and others, and so you may have noticed that in the guided notes that we use, I typically don't provide things like this, which are spaces to write answers to relate concepts and terms and definitions, or to draw pictures exemplifying relationships between terms and concepts. And we do that together, a variation of that activity in interteaching in class. But over time, when I have time to revise my guided notes, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to expand on the guided notes to provide space for you to do more conceptual work between some of the slides in lecture. Alright, so here's an example of guided notes pertaining to a lecture on clouds. Alright, so I'll just let you take a moment to look at this. So what are students doing? Well, they're filling in sentences, right, that are missing words. They're drawing pictures of what the concept looked like. They're plugging words into a diagram which depicts the relationship between the words, right, or in concepts. For example, we have types of clouds. Types of clouds are I guess that's called cirrus, cumulus, stratus. I don't know clouds. But the point here is that one of the ways you can structure guided notes is to have a diagram that evokes writing down words in a way that conveys or indicates their relationship that the student may not have derived had you not set the occasion with that type of task stimulus. Okay. All right. So there's an example of guided notes. Now, guided notes address two functions of note-taking: process and product. The process function is that it occasions interacting with the curriculum during instruction by listening, looking, thinking, writing. The product function generates a summary or outline of key points, terms, and definitions, which occasions subsequent study. Benefits are increased scores on quizzes and tests, increased note-taking accuracy, increased student responding during lecture. It's preferred over traditional note-taking usually. The teacher stays on task. And it may facilitate generalization through construction of a permanent product that can be retrieved later in other contexts. So for example, in our situation here, I believe that guided notes could help facilitate your generalization as a pre-service teacher of the concepts in the class and the procedures and the assessments. Help generalize that to practice once you start teaching after you've graduated from UTSA. Because I think these materials are going to set the occasion for you to be able to use the ideas and strategies in this course. Because what you've written down in the guided notes is correlated with reinforcement. I hope that spreads to other environments for you by keeping the completed set of guided notes accessible to you in your environment. All right, now a disadvantage is that it's time consuming. That's an understatement. It's really time consuming to develop guided notes. It requires a lot of preparation, careful consideration of what information students should respond and attend to during instruction. But the good news is that once you have developed guided notes, you can use them repeatedly over time, right? And it allows you also to standardize your instructional design and delivery over time, for which you can use data to constantly evaluate and revise and improve. Steps of making guided notes. First, you outline the lecture. Then you use clear prompts such as bullets to evoke responses to relevant lecture information. You use special symbols to indicate particularly important information. And then blank spaces in text to allow for 1 to 3 word responses varied across the text unpredictably. Now, some variations of guided note formats are text with blank spaces. That's one way you can do it. Another way you can, but you don't have to, design guided notes is to include opportunities to draw or to include pictures with missing objects, or text, pictures, or objects with missing links between them. So the learner specifies how they're related. And then space to draw pictures or diagrams. Those are all variations. Design considerations are to use consistent and predictable formatting, and avoid an excessive response requirement, which I'm guilty of. I've got to simplify my guided notes somehow to make them less effortful, less work for the student, but just as useful and effective and valuable. And then use easy to read font. Now, creating and using guided notes according to Twyman and Heward, 2018, based on Heward, 2013, identify the most important course content and lectures a student must learn and retain via lectures. In the guided notes, include all facts, concepts, and relationships students are expected to learn on the guided notes. Include background information. Delete key facts, concepts, and relationships from the lecture outline. Leave the remaining information to provide structure and context for students' note-taking. It's important to provide enough space for students to write. If you don't, their notes are going to get messy, and that kind of defeats or minimizes the extent to which you're facilitating or evoking appropriate and accurate note-taking. Don't require so many responses that students can't keep up with lecture. That's probably something I'm guilty of as well that I need to work on. Enhance guided notes with additional information, resources, and opportunities to respond. You can intersperse guided notes with other opportunities to respond, such as selection-based multiple choice question. That's what I do in in my Learn modules, is intersperse your guided note responses with either written assignments or ASRs. The multiple choice format ASRs. And response cards is another option in a live instructional format. You gradually fade the use of guided notes to facilitate independent note-taking in classes that don't use guided notes. You can provide follow-up activities to ensure that students study and review their notes, such as the way I ask you to bring the guided notes so that you can use them to be successful during interteaching in our class together. And then peer tutoring. Now, peer tutoring is defined as a collection of strategies that employ students as one-on-one teachers of academic content. Critical features of peer tutoring are the following: repeated practice opportunities, frequent and immediate feedback. Notice that's a theme throughout all of these ASR technologies. ABA-based instruction always includes frequent and immediate feedback. Systematic error correction. And then database decision making. Class-wide peer tutoring steps. 1. First, the teacher trains students on how to use class-wide peer tutoring. It's always the thing, right? The prerequisite is teach students how to use the technology before you implement it. And then step 2, pair students into dyads for tutoring sessions. And then conduct tutoring sessions daily or 2 to 3 times per week. Consider pairing high with high and low and high achieving students, but never pair low students. Okay, never pair a low achieving student with another low achieving student. Now step 4 is students are given folders containing task materials. And then students use flashcards to test and train and teach each other, for example, in a kind of like a SAF-MEDS way, and document progress in the task folder. An advantage is it capitalizes on peer motivation. Over time, this would reduce the teacher's workload, although they have a lot of preparation up front to prepare to train, in terms of training students and preparing the task materials. And it helps with classroom management, of course. So you really can consider a high ASR approach to instruction as also a classroom management strategy. Alright, so elements of classroom management required to use ASR successfully are the whole class and individual student schedules. In other words, this is the kind of stuff you have to have in your class for a high ASR approach to instruction to be successful. Whole class and individual student schedules. And schedules for the teacher and classroom staff which designate assignments and responsibilities across activities. You need an arrangement of the physical classroom space to minimize distractions and promote on-task behavior. For example, everyone can look forward in their seat when you're lecturing. And then clear and timely transitions between activities and complete detailed lesson plans, which specify antecedents and consequences, signals for responding during choral responding and response cards, and target responses and error corrections or other feedback, right? All of that has to be specified in advance for a high ASR approach to be effective. Alright, so this is a large unit, and so we're going to summarize everything briefly here at the end. So, behavioral approaches to assessment developed in the 1960s and 1970s, and began to be adopted by more teachers because they overcame many problems with traditional methods, such as confusing descriptions of behavior for explanations of behavior, and assessing learning too infrequently to modify instruction and correct student errors quickly. Now, in general, a curriculum provides the sequence for presenting information and the development of skills, but only the sequence, right? The teacher must arrange the classroom environment, arrange those alterable variables to occasion and reinforce acquisition, fluency, and generalization so that students can progress through the curriculum successfully and perform increasingly complex skills over time. Student learning and behavior are complex, but by considering student behavior, such as orienting towards academic tasks, motor skills, permanent products, in the classroom environment, such as environmental arrangements, task stimuli, instructional prompts, physical classroom structure. In the context of the behavioral assessment quasi-funnel using direct behavioral assessment, teachers can narrow the scope of their assessment to classify the problem with behavior or learning in a manner that leads to or prescribes the selection of effective interventions from the scientific literature and identification of specific environmental arrangements, task stimuli, and consequences that can be manipulated, i.e. they're alterable, to establish increased academic learning time in the evidence-based practice of ABA. By assessing how teachers use classroom time, they can maximize academic learning time through a high ASR approach to instruction and function-based treatments of challenging behavior. Alright, that wraps up this unit and this video part, and here are my references. Some of them are incomplete, but I'm out of time. Alright, there's the rest of my references. I very much hope you enjoyed this unit and found all of the content interesting, and I look forward to talking about it with you in class. See you then.